Tom Seager. Good to see you.
I'm glad you're here.
You know, I first remember meeting you. This was around the Christmas holidays, and it must have been, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. We had dinner at
The Henry.
The Henry. Thank you. And we had just gotten connected somehow. Yeah. I forget how, but you guys were the OGs. And you had really, in my opinion, brought the first real ice baths to the consumer market. Now,
what better place to start an ice bath company than the hottest city in North America?
Well, this is what blew my mind, because I'm sitting down with Seager at dinner, and he's like, this sucker will pump ice all through the Arizona summer, and it's hot as balls here. You know, we're hitting 120. So not only was it able to keep up outdoors in the Arizona summer, but I gotta be honest, I'd been in this industry for a long time prior, and you guys were the first ones that kind of broke out onto the scene. So a lot has changed since then, and the concept has really exploded since then. But you guys are still here. We're in your incredible facility. You're still building. And, you know, what I respect most about Morozko, and also about you personally, is your commitment to putting out high quality information, and information that's backed by science. And I read all your blog posts, and they're awesome.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. So maybe, Tom, what would be helpful is, I know the origin story because you and your co-founders told it to me over dinner, but it's a good one. So we'd love to hear the origin story, and then let's go from there.
I'd never heard of Wim Hof. I didn't know anything about this ice baths, but my former student, Jason Stauffer, he invited me to come out and do the Wim Hof breathing, and you buy all the bags of ice at Circle K. And I'd been taking cold showers, which made me angry. I hate them. And it turns out there's some science behind that too.
Interesting.
Partial is not the same as whole body cold water immersion.
Yep.
Whole body gets you some dive reflex relaxation. Partial will never do that for you. Your heart rate goes up and it never comes back down. So it's no wonder that a cold shower makes me angry, but an ice bath relaxes me. It's just I didn't know that until I went to my first Wim Hof. And this is 2018.
Yeah.
Well, Jason and I wanted to keep this up, especially because in Phoenix, the tap water gets up to like 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer.
There is no real cold shower.
Right. You get like a couple of weeks in the winter, and that's it. But we got sick of buying all the ice. You got to go down to the Quickie Mart, and you got to get 200 pounds, and then you put it in the stock tank. And then 15 minutes later, it feels like it's all melted because it's 120 degrees in the backyard. So we're both engineers. And Jason said, well, we ought to be able to do this. So I got a credit card out, and we took some old dorm fridges apart, and we bought some parts, and we made an insulated stock tank, and we made ice. We had a little party. People came over. They loved it. And Jeremy Mudick said he wanted to buy one. And so Jason and I kind of looked at each other like, this should really be a business, don't you think?
That's a beacon right there, my man.
Yep. When people are pulling the product out of you, they're trying to tell you, go into business. So we did. And I thought it was going to be, 2 a week or something. I thought it was going to be like a niche hobby. I'm a university professor. I teach engineering at ASU. I didn't think I was going to be running an ice bath business, but Ben Greenfield put us in the Boundless book, and people, they listen to Ben. If Ben says, you got to get a Morozko, people buy Morozko because they trust Ben. They know that he's tried everything under the sun. A guy who's going to put stem cells in his dick, is going to try a lot of extreme things. And when he says this works, his audience believes in him. So now we're in the Boundless book, and the business is picking up. Jason and Adrian quit their jobs, but something different happened to me. I was separated from my wife at the time. I'm going out on the dating pool, and I'm really self-conscious about how I look. I'd lost a lot of weight. And I said, well, I should be doing the blood tests. I got to get serious about my health. So I got the full male panel, and my PSA came back 7. Normal, they said, is 4. So I'm looking at this lab report. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm almost like twice. I'm in the danger zone.
So prostate cancer, is that what they were?
That's what's going through my mind. Like as soon as you take the PSA to the internet, they're saying, well, you're going to die of prostate cancer. And you're not. Like all it means is you have an inflamed prostate, and that can be indicative of prostate cancer. But what do I know? Like I'm an engineer. And it says, well, you should go to your medical doctor and you should have a prostate exam. You should probably have a biopsy. And I didn't want to do any of that. Instead, I started talking to other guys. And it turns out, I'm now 58. At the time, I was probably 52. Everybody had a prostate story. I was talking to guys older than me, some of them younger than me. And it's kind of a difficult topic. But, I'd say, hey, I have a question. Like, I just got my PSA back. Have you ever had your PSA tested? And all the guys older than me had been through something and they all had horror stories. I didn't want to go back to centralized medicine and have a biopsy that could lead to a sepsis infection or a false positive. So I decided I was going to do ketosis and ice baths every dang day. That's when I got really serious. I brought my PSA down. I'm still doing the same blood tests, and my testosterone went up through the roof. I was like over 1,100 nanograms per deciliter, purely accidental. And when I saw that number and it had that, big warning, out of range, too high, I thought, well, I got to figure out what's going on. I'm a scientist. I'll go to the library. There was a paper I found from 1991, and this Japanese study in young men, they did ice bath after exercise, which was what everybody does. They measured testosterone and luteinizing hormone. If you do the ice bath after the exercise, the testosterone and the luteinizing hormone that stimulates testosterone production in your gonads, they go down.
Sure.
Acutely. Say again?
Acutely after, but then I presume that it's...
the study was short term. It wasn't long term. But it said if you do your cold for recovery, you will reduce your testosterone and your luteinizing hormone, which is consistent with the other literature, consistent with Huberman's advice. Don't do the cold after your workout. Yep. At least wait 4 hours, because you will diminish your anabolic gains, your muscle gains.
I've heard that.
Well, I wrote up a little article about my experience, and I said, hey, look, there's this Japanese study. I think this is what's going on. Nobody read it, because nobody's going to MorozkoForge.com at this time for any kind of advice.
I was.
Thank you, Dave. Then we go through COVID, and COVID really shut me out of the classroom. So instead of thinking, well, this is going to be kind of a part-time thing, everybody goes nuts for at-home health. Everybody's health conscious. And I'm frankly not as busy at ASU as I thought I was going to be because of the COVID lockdowns. Well, I poured myself into growing Morozko, and I kept getting these stories of other people. Dean Hall, he had leukemia, and then he swam the entire length of the Willamette River, which is cold, by the way, and it took him 3 weeks, and he came out of that river, he didn't have leukemia anymore. Like all of these miraculous health transformation stories. I'd write another article, and I'd write another article, and Google didn't care. But then it's post-COVID. I'm in Iceland. I'm traveling now, and I'm there with my girlfriend, AJ. And I get off the plane, and we're going to see the Northern Lights. It's like December, and my phone's blowing up. And it's all these text messages telling me I'm on the Joe Rogan show. And I'm like, what the hell is it? I think I would be the first person to know if I was on Joe Rogan. And so I called somebody up, WhatsApp. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, Joe is reading your article. About the testosterone. Liver King just got outed for juicing, and now he's had Derek more plates, more dates, and he's got David Goggins on the show, and they're all talking about doing the ice bath before the workout for the testosterone boost, and he put your picture up there. That was all the world needed to hear. Once Joe said, I'm doing this, it's really hard, and it's working for me, people started writing to me from all over the world about what was happening.
Joe has one, though, correct?
He's got a Morozko. Okay. Yeah. And for 2023, he wouldn't shut up about it. Like, he had Jim Gaffigan on his show. Now, Jim's a famous comedian, but Jim is famous for eating junk food. Like his whole routine is how unhealthy he is. Mm-hmm. So Joe's like, I want to tell you about ice baths. They really work. They're, he's talking to the guy, the anti-health comedian, about his health stuff. And you can see this in Google Trends. Searches for cold plunge and ice bath are going through the roof. At the time, there were 2 or 3 companies besides us, and they didn't even make ice. But there were these sort of innovative companies at the leading edge. Then you can see it in 2023, all these Chinese chiller, inflatable tub, like Arctic
the Instagram
pod.
feed now is littered with them. Every type, barrels and inflatables and Everything under the sun.
Dave, it's given the industry a really bad name.
Sure, yeah.
People are starting to call us and ask us questions about the things that they've seen on other people's websites as if we were one of the same companies. So we just wrapped up a study of warranty, terms of service, and return refund policies in the cold plunge industry.
Ooh, good one.
It's stunning. The
it's deceptive market.
The restocking fees, the warranty exclusions. Like if you buy from one of our competitors and it shows up broken, they will mail you a new part, but you got to pay the labor and the shipping on the part. So you got to find your own plumber and your own electrician to install their broken part. And you've decided you're not happy with that, you can ship it back for a refund as long as it's still in the original packaging.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of these kinds of because
they're on Reddit.
Stories basically about crap units and stuff like that.
That's where our industry is going.
Sadly.
But I spent my 2023 writing a book. It's got more than 600 scientific citations in it. And there's, 13 chapters on all these different aspects, including the risks and dangers and the contraindications. And are you working on metabolism? Or are you working on brain health? Or are you working on sexual performance and function and fertility? So I spent my 2023 in the library, and I probably should have spent it, Dave, on Instagram, buying a bunch of ads and doing some sensational claims and things like that.
Well, the content you put out, I get a ton of stuff coming through my inbox, but I read every single one because I know it's going to be objective and it's going to be well cited. And it's going to be information I can trust. And this is a therapy that I want to use in my health. So maybe that you could have gone and done that. But I think I
would have stunk it at Instagram ads.
I do too, But the value of what you're building is also a compounding asset of all of that information. Agreed. And the brand and the trust. And no one else can really.
People tell me that. They write to me and they thank me for putting out these articles.
I thank you every time I read
exactly.
one.
I get a nice note from you.
That was on point.
Yep. That's because I've changed my whole academic career. I used to be a sustainability guy and I used to be all about the environment. And I've changed my focus. And I think it was really COVID that redirected me because we have a public health crisis in this country. You know that life expectancy in the United States, it peaked in 2018. It's not COVID that has driven it down. It was going down before we hit the pandemic.
Yeah, agreed. Mm-hmm.
So what is going on? And it's all metabolism. All the chronic illnesses, all the illnesses that are associated with aging, all the increased rates of mortality, they tie back to metabolic dysfunction. You know how to fix your metabolism? Well, yes, you can eliminate the seed oils, you can get your sleep right, you can get your light right, all these things are fine. But if all you can do is get into your ice bath 2-3 minutes a day, you're going to build your brown fat. You're going to increase your insulin sensitivity. You're going to resolve that metabolic dysfunction. You're going to stimulate the mitobiogenesis, and you're going to extend your life. And that's without diet changes. That's without exercise, which, by the way, I recommend. It's just that we don't have the cold that our bodies are expecting. Instead, we have heated leather seats.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue because before this interview, I said, hey, if I'm coming in this with fresh eyes, and I wanted to know what are some of the top 5 or the top X, I said to you, health benefits of who should use Icebath. What would those be? You sent me that list. So I'd love to go through them briefly and talk about them. But before we do, I think it's also important just to make a subtle distinction between Icebath and cold plunge. And so maybe you could just clarify that for people because there is a difference. They both have therapeutic value. But there's a 45-degree exposure, and then there's a 32-degree exposure. I think I heard Joe Rogan say that anything above 38 just isn't that interesting to him anymore. That doesn't mean everyone has to go down to that level. There's incredible stuff that can happen across the spectrum of those temperatures. But could you just clarify that for us?
There was a conversation that Joe had with Gary Brecka. And Gary's now so well known. He's got a super popular podcast himself. And Gary says to Joe, I haven't seen a lot of evidence that there, any benefit from going down to those cold temperatures. So why do you do it? And Joe goes, because it sucks worse. And I thought that's our new marketing tagline right there. Morozko sucks worse. And that's why you should do it. He's right. After you get acclimated, 38, 39 is boring. Now, when you're first starting out and it takes about 2 weeks to build that brown fat and build your thermoregulation mechanisms, like it happens pretty quick.
Sure.
Your fat remodels, your blood vessels remodel. But after you get acclimated, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, it doesn't give you the same gasp reflex. It doesn't give you the same psychological shock. You get in there and Joe is looking for that fight or flight. He's looking for that parasympathetic nervous system activation. That's what I'm looking for too. And you need to consistently do it with the ice chunks floating in the water to get those psychological benefits. But if all you're trying to do is reverse your type 2 diabetes, which is huge, if you're trying to get off the insulin, then 40 is going to be fine. You can get a lot of metabolic benefits in the low 40s. And most of these cheap chiller companies can get down to not outside in the Arizona summer, but if you're inside, most of them can do it and they're cheaper than Morozko.
Well, another thing, Tom, is also you made that remark from Joe. It just sucks more. You know what I mean? which implies there is some pain to go through. But in my experience, it actually is a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
Because you are learning how to work with your own mind, and you are learning how to regulate your physiology through an extreme experience. And one of the things I learned many years ago when I was doing intense Vipassana meditation was they taught you how to sit for very long periods of time, and you got really physically uncomfortable, but you were trained to not react in a positive or negative way. Now, that doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't react. And what that taught me was how to be in situations in life that were unpleasant, but not to have to react in a way that was unpleasant.
That's the part you get to choose. How do you respond?
And in the yogic traditions, they call cold exposure ishnan, which you probably have heard of, which means when you can get in that cold and get through the shock experience, survive that first 60 seconds, 120 seconds. They said if you can survive that, you can survive any challenge in life.
Yep.
So for me, the spiritual experience, first of all, means, am I able to go mind over matter on this? That alone is like a massive, massive challenge and experience just to learn how to regulate yourself through it. But then when you go do all this crazy shit you and I are doing, starting companies and jumping off a cliff with no parachute, it's
metaphorically,
it's like, hey, I can do that. I can get through any challenging experience in life. So even when I go to my place in Scottsdale, I'll see people, women or men, approaching the cold plunge, and they go through an experience where they close their eyes, they center themselves. They'll maybe even do a little bit of yoga and some breath work. They're really getting out of their head and going inward to this experience. Like that's the part that I really geek out on.
I think you're on the right track. That's the psychological.
Yeah.
What I used to work in infrastructure resilience, and I still do consulting for the Army Corps and for the Navy. So it's disaster response and recovery. But I'm much more interested in human resilience now, because the resilience isn't in the concrete or in the steel or in the dams. It's in the creative response to the disaster, to the stress, or to the catastrophe, whatever it is. So I've gotten really curious now about psychology in a way that has surprised me, because I'm a trained civil and environmental engineer. I've talked to probably a dozen super elite athletes, all different sports. So we're talking golfers, NFL, MLB. These are people, signing guaranteed multi-million-dollar contracts, playing in the Pro Bowl, playing in the Super Bowl. And they tell me the same thing that Joe says. They'll spend what feels like 15 minutes, and it's probably only like 45 seconds, but staring down at that Morozko, seeing that ice. They say the worst part of the ice bath is the 15 seconds before they get into the ice bath, because we all have this voice inside our head that says, I could maybe skip a day. Like, I'm not even on Instagram right now. Nobody's even watching, Yeah. And these are people like Fred Warner. He makes 12 tackles in the Super Bowl, and you think this guy's fearless, right? He goes, sometimes that cold water, Joe calls it his little bitch, it just turns him into a little bitch.
Wow.
Well, when Joe was talking to David Goggins and, stay hard, right? David is like the bravest, most courageous person. He goes, there is nothing that will make you question everything in your life like cold water. I didn't know at the time, but David Goggins has Raynaud's syndrome. Raynaud's syndrome is this, it's a feedback loop. It's a psychophysiological overreaction to the cold. So it was months after Goggins was on Huberman's podcast, and he posted pictures of his fingers, and they were chalk white because they had no blood in them. This is his Raynaud's reaction to the cold water.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I have a loved one who is dealing with that same thing.
Yeah. As do I. AJ used to suffer from Raynaud's. And now there are 2 case studies. Even though you would think Raynaud is a contraindication to Icebath, there are 2 case studies. One that I've supervised with AJ, and then Mike Mutzel has also supervised a woman. He runs the High Intensity Health podcast. And they both use the Icebath to overcome their Raynaud's. And sure enough, there is something called exposure therapy. Sometimes it's called stress inoculation therapy, where you gradually acclimate yourself. Yep, exactly. That's psychological benefit. When you're doing the exposure therapy, you are breaking this psychological, physiological feedback loop. And then you come out of the water feeling like you've just cheated death. For the people who say, well, I hate the cold. Gordon Ryan, he's on the Joe Rogan show. There's something you need to know about me. He says, I fucking hate the cold. He was so proud of himself because he did like 45. And then Joe said, no, you got to do 33, just like I do. So he did. And then he got a Morozko, because there's something, once you've discovered it, you don't want to give it up. You're like, I'm going to go back. I'm going to start every day with that win. And then everything else in my life seems like it's nothing.
So, getting down to some of the brass tacks here, you've hinted at some of the metabolic benefits of this. We all know that metabolic dysfunction is epidemic. There's different ways to tackle it, but I asked you, could you lay out, these are Tom Seager's top 5. So let's run through them here, Tom. And the first is, the first reason you'd want to maybe do this in the first place is metabolic dysfunction. So that could be insulin resistance. It could be obesity, weight gain. It could be PCOS. There's lots of things that happen, erectile dysfunction. There's lots of things that really, the root cause is insulin resistance.
Including cancer, including heart disease, including Alzheimer's.
Cardiovascular disease, cancer,
exactly
yes,
right.
The big ones.
They have their origins in the metabolism.
How, and I've read some of your posts before, and the one thing I've yet to do, which I normally wear a CGM, a Dexcom, continuous glucose monitor, but I have not been able to test that pre-post ice bath, and I don't even know how quickly you'd see anything. There's obviously also measurements like fasting insulin and hemoglobin A1C. Those you're testing more episodically, like every 3 or 6 months. But can you help us understand the mechanisms biologically between the cold and how our body processes metabolic health?
I had to learn a lot about insulin. I didn't want to become a metabolism expert, but it was in 2001 in the winter, and my son was very sick. I didn't know what was wrong. He was 6 years old. And my wife called our doctor, who's also our next door neighbor, because we were in a small town in northern New York. And my wife's saying, well, he's got a fever and he doesn't have any energy. And our pediatrician said, he's probably got the flu, it's going around. And then my wife said, and he's peeing the bed a lot. And she didn't tell me, but on that phone call, John told her, meet me in the emergency room right away. Your son has diabetes and your life is going to change. But my wife didn't want to believe it. She just said, oh, John says to meet us at the hospital, So we lived across the street. I carried him over and they take him right away. Like they admitted him to the pediatric ICU. And I'm still kind of in the dark, like what's going on? John comes up to me with an orange and a syringe. He says, nobody leaves this hospital until you figure these out. I'm like, John, what are you talking about? He goes, this is an insulin syringe. Your son has diabetes. That means he doesn't make insulin anymore. You're going to be checking his blood sugar and you're going to be injecting him with this insulin until he figures out how to do this himself. I had to read everything. I had
Type 1 or type 2?
This is type 1. This is not like when we talk about diabetes being epidemic, that's type 2.
Yeah.
This is a autoimmune disorder in which his own immune system has attacked the islet cells in his pancreas that make insulin. He doesn't make it anymore. He needs to get it exogenously. This is before CGM. This is before insulin pumps. And so we got to prick his finger. We learned how to prick his arm. We got to give him injections at least 2, sometimes 3 times a day. I kept scrupulous records because at the time I just finished my dissertation, right? And I've got my lab notebooks and we're writing down all his exercise and all of his injections and things like that. And Dave, there is no amount of insulin you can give a 6-year-old boy that will prevent an insulin spike from an Oreo cookie. I had every food mapped out, and the American Diabetes Association wanted me to believe that he could eat anything he wants. Cupcakes, no problem. Birthday cake, no problem. Whatever he likes. Breakfast cereal, just feed him to him as long as you bolus for it. But I had the data right there in our lab book saying, this is crazy. He's up to 220. I'm not going to give him another 6 units of H, so that he can have Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I'm switching this kid to like eggs and whole wheat toast, which he enjoys. And then I looked at my daughter, who's 2.5 years younger than him. And I said, if an Oreo is doing this to him, what's it do? Oreos are right out. All of these concentrated processed carbs, we gave them, your diet starts in the grocery store. And so we eliminated all of that from the very start of the new millennium. Well, he grows up and of course he can take care of himself. And of course we get the pump and we get the technology is going way through the roof. But what I learned from that is I could not trust the dietitians. I could not trust the endocrinologist. I could not trust the information that I was getting from the American Diabetes Association that was making my son sick. So it was for me the origins of what they call do your own research, and that's said derisively on Twitter, but I'm the only thing I trust now.
Sure, yeah.
So this is where I learned about metabolism. This is where I became my own expert on insulin. And then AJ called me. I was in Texas with my daughter, and she said, well, I'm having a lot of abdominal pain. I said, well, maybe you should go to the emergency room. She said, I don't know. Maybe it's just like a cyst, or maybe I'm popping an egg, or, she had all these excuses, but she sounded terrible. And I said, you go to the emergency room. I'm going to the airport. I came back. She's in there and the doctors haven't told her what's wrong. It's very frightening. Her case goes all the way up to the tumor board at the hospital. They say, you have a growth on your liver. She says, by growth, do you mean a tumor? And they go, yeah, because you have a history of bleeding disorders, we can't operate. The liver is all blood vessels. And if we operate, you just might bleed out and die. We can't treat it with radiation and it won't respond to chemo. We'd have to kill you with chemo to kill the tumor. She said, well, what can you do? They said, watchful waiting. Dave, tumors, they come from somewhere. They don't just go away because you're going to have a scan every 3 months or something. And so she said, Tom, watchful waiting, that's like a death sentence for me. I have 4 young daughters. What am I going to do? I said, you're going to do what I did. You're going to do keto. You're going to do Icebath. You're going to do what Dean Hall did. Keto and Icebath. We're going to attack this metabolically. So she did. She went into keto. She started going to that Icebath, not every day, but several times a week. And damned if that tumor didn't shrink. This is where I had to go to the library and read Thomas Seyfried's work about the metabolic origins of cancer.
Yep.
I had to learn about brown fat, which I didn't know a dang thing about until, years after my son was diagnosed. Well, there's a good reason for that. At the time my son was diagnosed, medical doctors thought there was no such thing as brown fat in adult human beings. They thought, kids have it, but then you lose it as you get older. It's just the way it is. Until a team of doctors in Sweden, this is like 2007, they were doing PET scans to detect tumors. You inject glucose that is doped with radiation. You see where the glucose is going. And because tumors preferentially uptake glucose, you do the scan and you can locate the tumors. But they saw all these symmetrical spots on their scans. And they said, it's not a tumor. What could that be? In fewer than 5% of the scans in Sweden, they were identifying brown fat because these instrument rooms were cold. So the Sloan Kettering Institute, they're in the United States. They said, well, maybe we should go back through all our PET scans and see if we can find some of this brown fat. It's sort of true. By the age of 45, fewer than 5% of American adults still have brown fat. So you can kind of understand why the medical doctors thought you just don't have it. But you do have it if you get cold. And if your brown fat's gone, the problem is it leads to metabolic dysfunction. The brown fat and the thyroid, they work together to regulate your metabolism. The thyroid is speaking to the brown fat chemically, and the brown fat is speaking to the thyroid. The thyroid makes thyroid hormone, and there's lots of different types of thyroid hormone, but let's oversimplify this as an active form and an inactive form. It is the brown fat that converts the less active to the more active. So the thyroid and the brown fat are in constant communication. Brown fat modulates your thyroid function. It is brown fat that will fix your hyper or hypothyroidism, at least in many cases, because if you've got no brown fat, there's nothing to regulate the thyroid function. Well, it took the scientists years after my son was diagnosed to say, yeah, brown fat is a thing. And then Susanna Sober can get a whole dissertation now in brown fat. It's like a whole different branch now of biological or physiological science. And it is the key to improving your insulin resistance. It does a few other things too. It's not just thermogenesis, but it will secrete neuroprotective hormones. So brown fat is good for your brain, which partly explains why they say, Brecca's famous for quoting this, so they didn't make it up. Alzheimer's is known as type 3 diabetes.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Because it also originates in metabolism.
So the mechanism then is the cold is the thermogenesis of the cold is increasing the brown fat stores, which are a huge component of proper healthy metabolism. Also regulates through interaction with the thyroid. And so that's the primary mechanism then of where we get these metabolic benefits. Can you speak, Tom, a little bit to, I also have read that, well, I guess it's all related because as the brown fats builds, the insulin sensitivity improves, and that also has a downstream effect just to body composition improvements. So
this is really interesting because the cold will remodel your fat, but it's not actually effective for weight loss. And this is where Brecca's wrong.
You mentioned that. I thought, Cam, you were very humorous about it, but you're like, I'm 50-something and I'm still
a fat guy, right? Look, if anybody was going to be all ripped from cold exposure, that would be me. Sure. But you see me go into the ice. I'm still a 50-year-old fat guy, and it's kind of tough. I wish I looked like Ben Greenfield. I wish I looked like Mike Mutzel, for goodness sakes. But I'm never going to be an Instagram model. I'm going to stay a university professor. And when you do the research, you find that yes, cold revs up your metabolism. Yes, cold will burn fat. But at night, your core body temperature comes back down. Your metabolism slows back down. Sure. Your body rebuilds those fat reserves. It's called a compensatory metabolic mechanism. Cold it's a good way to, as an adjunct to a diet, to exercise, to cleaning up your diet, getting the processed seed oils out and that kind of thing. But the first 5 pounds you lose, it's all inflammation. It's all
that
water.
Makes sense.
However, it will remodel the fat in your body from visceral to subcutaneous. So visceral is the belly fat.
Yeah. So if you were
organs.
doing DEXA scans, you might see a shift in how the fat is distributed. Yep. And we know that the visceral is the most inflammatory.
Yep.
So although your net weight will probably stay the same. It might even increase.
Yep.
But the cool thing about the DEXA scans is they show you the fat distribution.
Yep.
So, okay, that makes sense.
Which an in-body scan does not do. Yeah. So if you're going to, Lifetime Fitness and you got the electrodes on your feet and your hands, they are using electrical impedance to estimate your body composition. And they're not calibrated for brown fat. Yep. So I have 3 case studies. One of them is Chris Gethin. And if you follow Chris, he's a bodybuilder. He's completely ripped. He's in like the single-digit body fat. And his in-body scanner was telling him 14%. He got a little discouraged. He sent me a picture and he's like, does this seem like 14%? I go, how much have you been in your ice bath? He's like, every day, because he's got a Morozko. I go, no, the in-body scanner is lying to you because it's not calibrated for the brown fat. You get a different impedance, and you'll see an instant jump. And by instant, I mean a week after you start ice baths, your in-body scanner will say, hey, you just gained 2% body fat. No, you didn't. You're fooling your in-body scanner. And I have 3 or 4 case studies of people that back this up. But the DEXA scan will be much more interesting.
Right on. And yeah, I've seen those changes in my own body, my first DEXA scan, and it shows you the color coding on here. And then like you, I started learning how to change my diet. And that's a huge risk indicator, is the amount of visceral adipose tissue. So, okay, so I get all of that part. I get how the metabolic benefits work. The next one I wanted to ask you about was mood improvement. Because again, my experience, you get in there and you come out and you're like, you're sharp and you're bright and you're clear, and it's just a little high. And so, and there's also people who have worked through a lot of different, let's just say, mental health conditions, depression, anxiety. A woman I met recently, hypochondria. Where going through the cold, she learned how powerful her mind was through overcoming that experience, and was able to realize, well, if I can do that, I can overcome this. So it's doing something to the neurotransmitters and the chemicals in the brain. I've heard numbers thrown around loosely. You can probably correct us on this, about increases in dopamine and norepinephrine, catecholamines and stuff like that. Can you give us a concise way to understand what's happening at the neurotransmitter level?
The simplest explanation is it is hard to be in a bad mood when you got 3 times the dopamine in your bloodstream as you had before.
I mean, right? Most people would chase a dopamine high like that through a lot of illicit means.
Exactly.
And it's crazy. I've even read anecdotally, like people going through addiction recovery. Even the cold bath, like it helps to create that high. Yep. So what's going on there with the neurotransmitter stuff?
The first one is the neurotransmitters, like this immediate short term, takes you out of whatever monkey was bouncing around in your head into your present moment and making you feel good. It breaks the bad mood cycle. And then you come out with motivation and energy, and that's terrific. And then I read a book by Chris Palmer. He was just on Mark Bell's Power podcast. He wrote a book called Brain Energy. Chris is a psychiatrist at Harvard. I did a review of Brain Energy and I put it up on Amazon. And I'm sorry, Chris, I only give it 4 out of 5 stars because, I'm like, hey, you could have done a little bit more in this second half.
Tough crowd.
But yeah, that's right. But what he pointed out is that the brain uses 25 to 30% of all the energy that the body needs. Mm-hmm. It is the most energy intensive of all your major organs. If your metabolism isn't right, that is, if the mitochondria in the brain aren't right and you're not processing energy well, of course you're in a bad mood.
Sure. Because
a lot of the things that we need to do to manage our negative emotions and to manage our anxieties, they take energy, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectic behavioral therapy or cognitive reframing or all these things that Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt wrote this book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And I read it because it's all about universities and how the universities are now making the students, creating the conditions in the university that lead to these emotional dysfunctions. Well, if you're going to do the opposite, if you're going to lead yourself to emotional health, that's energetically intensive. And Palmer figured out that his patients that would not respond to SSRIs, that were not responding to talk therapy, they sure felt a lot better when they were on the ketogenic diet. What he didn't write a lot about in his book is that he was homeless as a child for periods because his mother suffered from schizophrenia. He dedicated his book to his mother who's passed on. And you can I've never met Chris, like we've messaged back and forth a little bit, but we've never talked about this. But just like me with my son and diabetes got me into metabolism, you can imagine how Chris must feel about schizophrenia, about anorexia, about some of these they're not just mood disorders, right? These are
psychiatric
deadly disorders,
yes.
Right? And he has rearranged his approach to psychiatry around metabolism. And he's not the only one. There's a whole movement now in it. So the short term is you get a big boost in these neurotransmitters like the noradrenaline, the adrenaline, the dopamine, all that stuff is great. Vasopressin,
and
oxytocin.
that's confirmed in the literature, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some really good blood serum studies on all of this.
Okay.
But longer term, you get the metabolic boost that your brain needs to do that hard work of managing your anxieties and your emotions. So I think we're really onto something here when we're talking about cold plunge therapy I call it mood management, but the cases of resolving major depression, they keep coming at me. Readers who are telling me that nothing worked. One of them, he's going to come visit us in Phoenix. He said, we did a long interview. He was very vulnerable. He said he'd tried to drown himself in the bathtub at home. He lives in Latvia. His brother found him, interrupted him. He's in his 20s, and he was depressed. Well, the bathtub water's warm. Next day, this guy's got it all figured out. He tells his parents, I know I feel much better. I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to go jogging. I really want to take care of myself now. And dad goes, wait a second. Give me my shoes. His son's out the door, and his dad's like, he's not going running. He's going down to the beach. He's going to drown himself. Dad books for the beach because he wants to intercede. And he sees his son is already in the water when he gets there. Dad, clothes on and everything. He's like diving into the Baltic. And he reaches the son like somehow he's going to pull him out. And when he gets here, the son says, I don't want to die, Dad. The water is cold. The warm water, and he's depressed. The cold water, and he gets all this energy. He gets his lunch. And the dad says, we will come down to this beach every day. We will go swimming together. Well, now he's a product designer, and he's invented this little thing. It looks like, a Star Wars droid or something. And it will measure your temperature and how long you're in there and stuff, because he's doing it every day. And he's coming to Phoenix so that we can do this research workshop together and plan out.
Is that the one that's coming up here later this month?
It'll be on the ASU campus.
Awesome.
We're bringing in doctors and patients and scientists, and we're saying, what's the research that really needs to be done? Yeah. And how do we get the clinicians in touch with the scientists so that we can improve the protocols and practice, that kind of thing?
Awesome. Just one more thing on the mood regulation. I think that's a nice way to kind of like succinctly sum it all up, basically. But, just waking up in the morning, and a lot of people need a few cups of coffee and a little, it's hard to get the engine running sometimes. So I
just wake up morning, like a kid on Christmas morning.
I do too. I don't have an issue with
today.
It. But
right.
But, if you could do it every morning, how different would your days be? I don't have access to it at home on a daily basis, but
Dave, you know what you need to do. That I'm making them right through these walls. If you want access every morning, then you know what you need to do to get it.
Well, let's talk business. Right on.
Well, this is why, me and Jason invented it, because we didn't want to do it once a week. Yeah. We didn't want it to be an hour and a half ordeal. Sometimes you want to get in there and you just want to do like 3 minutes. Well, you're not going to go down to the gas station and pick up 150 pounds of ice so you can do a 3-minute ice bath. No. So we needed a machine where we could microdose cold if we wanted to do that, or do 2 or 3 a day.
Yeah. It's just getting high on your own supply.
Yeah.
All right. So that's 2. We've got mood regulation. We've got the metabolic benefits, anti-aging, longevity. Everyone's nerding out now on some of the new diagnostics that are getting pretty good.
Yeah,
we can start to measure biological age.
I know you want to keep this under an hour, so I'm going to cut to the chase. They're all crap.
Okay.
Your telomeres, crap. Your DNA methylation, crap. And somebody who sells these things, who has a medical degree and an appointment at a more prestigious university than me, and I'm not going to say who these people are because they'll find me on Twitter and troll my butt, but they're all crap. Mm-hmm. And they're crap. I know they're crap because I have read the literature.
Interesting.
Telomere length and DNA methylation as 2 examples. They hardly improve your predicted mortality at all.
Fair point.
There's no such thing as biological age if it is not in expected mortality. This is what we mean when we say biological age. Mm-hmm. So you need to have the correlation between telomere length and expected mortality, and it just isn't there. However, Patrick Porter, he's the brain tap guy.
I know Patrick, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't do the material. He doesn't take a sample of your DNA, your saliva or whatever, and look for a material marker of your age. And there's a good reason. Life is energetic. You can only detect life as a departure from thermodynamic equilibrium. If you want to get a handle on your biological age, measure it energetically like Patrick Porter does. Don't look for it materially. Sure. So Patrick's, he's measuring the energy that your mitochondria are putting out. All the theories of aging compared to mitochondria are crap. They're inferior to the mitochondrial theory of health. Your mitochondria have their own DNA. And it's hard to measure the quality of those DNA because there can be thousands of mitochondria in a single brown fat cell, for example. Your red blood cells, they don't have any mitochondria. So you can suck a blood sample out. It's not going to help you with a mitochondria assessment. Because the mitochondria have their own DNA, and nobody told me that freshman year of high school, you got to keep track of the quality of your mitochondria if you're going to understand your biological age and expected mortality. When you exercise too hard, when you eat too many carbs, when you mess up your light hygiene, your mitochondria will be damaged. And that's okay as long as they have time to recover, time in the dark, time to rest. One of the best things you can do for your mitochondria is cold plunge therapy. It stimulates mitobiogenesis. It stimulates mitophagy. It will upgrade the quality of your mitochondria. And because it is the mitochondria that process the energy that are responsible for this energetic conversion. Look to your mitochondria for your anti-aging, not in the nucleus. Yeah. It's the mitochondria that produce the energy that take care of the nucleic DNA. So anti-aging for me is mitochondrial therapies. I get into Patrick Porter's Neural Check. And it's the first time I've ever been there. And it's during the lockdowns. We're in Menlo Park together. And he's showing me all the, meridians and stuff. He goes, Tom, you're doing great. I could sell you one of these brain tap machines, but it wouldn't do any good. Why not, Patrick? He goes, well, I get Dave Asprey's guys in here and they're always in the upper 80s and they're really close to optimal. I know I can get them into mid 90s, upper 90s. You're already there. So I can't really help you. And I think he's flattering me, because I don't know, we're just having a good time. He goes, let me show you one more screen. He goes, you're 32 years old, biologically. And I'm, 54 or something at the time. And I think it's kind of a joke. Then he comes to Phoenix and he texts me. He says, you should come down. You should come to our booth. You should see what we're doing. I say, yeah, let's get me in the Neural Check. It's been 2 years later. He goes, congratulations, Tom. You're 30, right? I'm aging. You can do all the stuff that Brian Johnson's doing.
So his test is the mitochondria, basically looking at mitochondria as the primary indicator.
He's not sampling your mitochondria. He's sampling your energy. And it is the mitochondria that are responsible for all of the energy conversions.
I got to talk to Mr. Porter there and get myself one of these tests.
He comes to Phoenix 2-3 times a year, I would guess, because there's so many conferences here. Yeah. But I have a Neural Check. We'll hook you up. We'll attach you to Patrick's software. We'll get a biological age. Then we'll get you a Morozko. You'll get in there every day. And then we'll measure you again 6 weeks later. And we'll see if we can't age you in reverse too.
I'm into that. All right. So that's number 3, anti-aging. Number 4 is brain health in general. So not necessarily mood, but the organ of the brain is the next one on the list. So
we touched on this metabolically, but I'm going to tell you another story. There's a man who is a faculty member at University of South Florida. His name is Joe DeTore. He spent 28 years as a Navy saturation diver, and then he left the service and he got his PhD. He got it in hyperbaric medicine, it's biomedical engineering or something like that. But he wanted to study hyperbaric because if you spent 28 years, studying pressure and oxygen and dive times, you'd be pretty curious about hyperbaric too. Joe loves his truck. He's got this 1946 pickup and he's driving around Florida and everything is great. But you know what they have in airbags for a 1946 pickup truck? Nothing. And when you get T-boned, your head gets smashed up against the side of your antique truck and you don't wake up until you're in the hospital. And there's a resident looking over you saying, Dr. DeTore, don't you remember me? I took your class. He's got traumatic brain injury. He's now got to heal himself. He says, I'm going to use hyperbaric. I'm going to use red light. I'm going to use cold plunge. He's just throwing everything at it. He can't even read the literature anymore because his brain's not working right. He's like, anything that makes sense to me, I'm going to try. He explained the logic. He said, when you get in up to your neck, vasoconstriction shuts off all of the circulation in your legs. Where does the blood go? Right up to your brain. Yeah. Because your brain's still warm. It goes into your core to defend your core body temperature. And he goes, and it increases the perfusion in the brain. I'm trying to get more blood into my brain so I can heal my traumatic brain injury. Now he's on Instagram, Dr. Deep Sea, spent 100 straight days underwater. He's coming to our workshop because nobody knows more about healing traumatic brain injury than the guy with the PhD who has lived through it.
Boom. Well, then stacking it with hyperbaric too. Yeah. That is a powerful combination in general.
You could say, though, but what are the mechanisms? The increased perfusion in the brain, that's one.
Sure.
But it's not just that. It's also brain-derived neurotropic factor. It's also FGF21. There are these neuroprotective factors that are stimulated when you get cold. And I don't understand why exactly. The only thing that makes sense to me is that when you plunge yourself into the cold water, your body's like, we got to take care of the brain here. We have to defend the vital organs. So as a story, it sort of makes sense. But there's a book, Barefoot to Billionaire. This is John Huntsman, who was a chemical engineering entrepreneur. And in this book, a friend of mine told me I should read it. He starts with his, humble beginnings back in the 30s. He's born on an Indian reservation. But he's got no pulse. He's got no breath. The doctor gave him up for dead because the doctor's going to attend to the mom, right? But the midwife said, I'm going to bring him back to life. What did she do? Thermal contrast therapy. She ran him under the hot. She ran him under the cold. Under the hot, under the cold. And this shocked him into life. He began to breathe. He began to cry. Huntsman wakes up and he gives away $1 billion as an adult, as a successful rich man, to a cancer institute. But he seemed to kind of forget the therapeutic effects of the cold because he's all looking in the nucleus. He's not looking in the mitochondria. He's not looking in the metabolism for the origins of cancer. But I'm following his story, so I got to go to the library. Sure enough, cold water therapy used to be used for infants that had suffered a brain injury during birth. You know what they use now? Viagra. Because Viagra promotes vasodilation, just like cold water therapy will.
Wow.
This is why erectile dysfunction is one of the first clinical markers of metabolic dysfunction. So you can take the Viagra and it will promote the mitochondrial production of nitric oxide that will cause the vasodilation. Great. This increases blood flow to the penis and it resolves the erectile dysfunction. But it does it at the expense of the mitochondria, not by healing the mitochondria, but by overcoming the insulin resistance that's trying to protect those damaged mitochondria. So one of the best things you can do for your sexual performance as a man is do a program of cold plunge therapy that improve the mitochondria that produce that produce the energy for that nitric oxide.
Well, that segues us into the final one, sexual performance and relationship health. And I know I've read some of your work around testosterone increases. Obviously, that's going to increase libido in men. But you mentioned something before the show. You're seeing actually even more significant increases in the ladies.
This is brand new. And by brand new, I mean a reader. She was at Dallas for Asprey's conference.
Yeah, we were there.
Yeah, okay. And, she's meeting all these famous people and that kind of thing. But she texts me, I'm not at Asprey's conference. And she goes, where? Well, I was hoping to meet you. You're not here because I wanted to share some results. Oh, what are those? She sends me her lab reports. Now, she's had a complete hysterectomy and what's called an oophorectomy. I can't even pronounce it. And her ovaries removed. Mm-hmm. She's 60 years old. She went into surgical menopause after the surgery, but of course she would be menopausal at her age. And she's been on a low-dose testosterone replacement therapy now for decades. And her measured testosterone before Icebaths was kind of on the low end of normal, but that's what her physician was trying to shoot for. 10x improvement, like in more than 10x from, 14 to 163, if I'm remembering this correctly. And she wanted to share that. Her estrogen also went up. She said, I got a meeting with my endocrinologist on Monday, and I got a feeling that they're going to try and get me off the testosterone. But Pam, how do you feel? Great. She says, my hair is coming in thicker. I have better energy. And Dave, I did not have the guts to ask her about her libido because we're recording this, right? And she's like, it's fine, Well, I posted that. And then I got a message from a younger woman, ovaries intact. She's 32 and she's more concerned about how do I preserve my fertility because I'm going to want to have kids and I'm getting a little older. She had her labs done, doubled. But when she texted me, she said, I didn't get that much of a boost, only 0.5. Well, in the United Kingdom, they use different units. Here, I went from 14 to 160. I'm up 150 units. And she was like, I only increased 0.5. But in her units, she went from 0.6 to 1.1. And I forget what it was, nanomoles per milliliter or something. Yeah. She almost doubled. Her estrogen went up 3 times. So this is 2 women over the space of 2 weeks that are sending me their labs saying all they changed was Icebath, and then they're getting this huge boost in their sex hormones. Well, that, I think, calls for further study. Where is the study of Icebath and serum levels of testosterone and estrogen in women?
Who could possibly do that research?
Exactly right. If only there was someone setting up 1,000 square foot lab in Scottsdale, Arizona that could, work with me to study this question. If there's anybody listening to this podcast, please message me.
Let's close out here, Tom, and tell us about the research, because you've had such a good, broad perspective on all the information that's out there. You've got the N of 1 case reports coming in. You're like, there's something here. Nobody's studied it. You're probably looking at all the scientific literature. You know where the gaps are. You know what gaps really need to be plugged to further, legitimize all of this. So like any good businessman, entrepreneur, you're like, well, I guess we're doing it. And so you're kicking off a research.
I'm not a good businessman. I'm not a good entrepreneur. And I don't know that any good businessman or entrepreneur would take this approach. You took the initiative
to say, listen, this is a problem. I'm going to fix it. We're going to do this research. So tell us about that.
The thing we're doing now, I've never talked about this in public. I've talked about it with some of the people coming to the research workshop. Here's what we're doing now. It is called the Cold Plunge Research Institute, CIPRI. I just signed the engagement letter with a nonprofit attorney here in Arizona. We're going to stand up a 501c3. It is going to run a cold plunge research conference here in Phoenix. We're going to do it longest day of the year, because I figure that's the best thing to do, in June at the solstice. People will come here. I mean, we'll have ice baths so that they can cool off, but we'll have university professors. We will have clinicians. We'll have patient representatives, and we will have industry representatives. That includes Morozko. But there are so many bad actors in this business right now. Crooks. I don't know if it's illegal, but I'm calling them crooks because these are deceptive marketing practices. And you don't have to go very far on Reddit to find the crooks. To be an industry member of this Cold Plunge Research Institute, you're going to have to meet certain standards: truth in marketing, truth in advertising, certain safety standards for the performance of your equipment. I've talked to Matt Kuiper from Desert Plunge. He's right here in Scottsdale. The guy who runs Icebath Works, Jeff, he's flying down to Phoenix so he can talk to Matt and I about what's the industry role in this research institute. And of course, I want you to come in. I want you to come to the conference. I want you to do a presentation about what Heads Up is doing. I want you to help guide this nonprofit. And this is going to put some distance between the business and the science. People are still going to say, he's just saying that because he wants to sell ice baths. And there's no way for me to really rebut that, because I do sell ice baths, but they have the order of operations wrong. It's not that I started doing the science because I wanted to sell the ice baths. After I did the science, I realized we've got to sell these ice baths. We have to make this available to people. And we're still the only commercially available ice bath company in North America that actually makes ice. It would be unethical of me to not start an ice bath company. People can say, well, why is it so expensive? Maybe it's so expensive because I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe it's so expensive because I'm a university professor instead of a real, manufacturing engineer. If it's too much, Matt from Desert Plunge makes a good product and he's an honest guy. You can get one of these less expensive units. You don't have to get ripped off doing it. But we sell convenience and we sell ice. So there's a segment of the market that isn't so price sensitive. They just want the best. And that's the market that for right now we're trying to serve.
I love it. And like you said, there will be other trusted and reputable companies that you can go to And you're not going to have some poor, innocent person out there who reads about how this can help them and finds a product and gets ripped off.
Right.
That should never happen.
Exactly right.
So there's at least some quality control, and there's some trust and some authenticity built into it all.
And what are you going to do? Trust the FDA to regulate this industry? Trust the CDC's advice? We have lost the trust in the government institutions that are supposed to be protecting our health. And now we look to Joe Rogan. And so since the FDA is incapable of doing it and the CDC is useless, we've got to do this ourselves. Get reliable information out to people that they can verify for their N=1 self. I don't give a crap what the peer-reviewed, double-blind, randomized controlled study that showed up in the Lancet said, because nothing matters more than your N=1 experience. You need the tools to figure out what works for you, not worked for, some Japanese cohort of 23-year-old college students that they got on an exercise bike in 1991. You got to run your own study on your own self to get reliable information about you.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Tom. That's why we started Heads Up.
That's right.
I'm like, how the hell do I know if anything's working for me? Yeah. Where's the data?
There you go.
So it's been an awesome ride watching you guys grow.
Thanks.
I'm excited to see you next week. Is it next weekend with the research?
Yeah.
Okay. And keep doing the work you do, man. Awesome
Thanks very
stuff.
Much. Yeah.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to Data Driven Health Radio.